Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. He serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Good to see you, sir. How skeptical are you of Kim Jong-un's intentions to denuclearize?
Well, I think the safe thing is to always be skeptical, and that's why, frankly, I know Mike Pompeo well. I served with him on the Energy and Commerce Committee. We sat next to each other. We talked about foreign policy a lot together, and this is the right guy to have there. Now, that said, I believe he knows that we're going to have verifiable evidence that North Korea wants to denuclearize, but we're going to be skeptical. And I think this is going to be, there's going to be probably moments over the next few months where there are valleys, where we're sitting around saying this thing's never going to happen, and there's going to be up moments. Really, we judge this by what happens in the end, because I really think this is to the point where either we get a verifiable, in essence, denuclearized North Korea for infinity deal, or else military action is highly likely.
You know, the Defense Intelligence Agency, we reported this week, is, frankly, they think it has no intention of denuclearizing. And in fact, they've got all this evidence showing that ramping up ambitions on the nuclear front. You're on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. What do you make of those reports? How concerned are you that they're maybe going even in the other direction?
Yeah, I don't want to comment necessarily on leaked reports from the government, but what I will say is this, is it appears that Kim Jong-un is not making proactive steps, with the exception of blowing up a nuclear test site, to denuclearize. That's why maintaining the sanctions is so important. That's why continuing to engage our allies and, frankly, adversaries in the region and saying, despite the fact that we're meeting with Kim Jong-un, don't believe that this means that we're somehow giving up a military posture or a posture of strength, which is why I think we need to actually continue some of those exercises going forward. Because look, we want a deal. We want, North Korea to be able to open up their economy and have no nuclear weapons, but we are prepared to take action if they fail to do that, because that puts us and all of our allies at threat in the region.
Yeah, those military exercises called provocative war games by the president.
Right.
If Mike Pompeo comes home with anything short of a full accounting of the nuclear arsenal that North Korea possesses, are these meetings a failure?
No, I don't think so. I'd like to see him come home with that, and I'm sure he'd like to come home with that. But ultimately, I think we can judge this by what happens in the end. And I know that every meeting we kind of want to look at and be like, well, this is a failure, this isn't a failure. I think we're going to be able to judge failure or success sometime into the future. If you look at even how the Iran situation went down, while I disagreed with what the final deal looked like, let's talk about that process. That process took a year or 2 years, and ultimately there were times where people were like, this is bad, this is good, it's never going to happen, it is. While I disagreed with the final outcome, the process is probably similar, in fact, the negotiations, to what you're going to see here in North Korea.
This week, we saw the Senate Intelligence Committee breaking with the president, saying Russia did try to help Trump win the 2016 election.
And with the House Intel Committee.
Right. We know that Trump will be meeting with Putin one-on-one, we're told, after the NATO summit next week. Do you think the president will bring up any of these issues when he meets with Vladimir Putin? Should he?
I certainly think he should. There's a lot of issues to bring up with the Russians, the violation of the de-escalation zone in Syria, the killing of civilians, the intentional bombing of hospitals, interfering in the United States election, continuing to interfere in United States elections going forward, our friends in Europe, the continuing war in Ukraine. All of these things the Russians deny, and the poisoning of people now in the United Kingdom. They deny all this. You can't trust anything the Russians say. So I hope the president goes into this. I'm glad he's meeting with Vladimir Putin. I think when we can talk to our adversaries, that's good, but walk in from a position of strength and don't hesitate to call out Vladimir Putin on things like this. I'm a great fan of George W. Bush, but he even looks back and says, when I walked out and said I looked into Putin's soul and saw goodness, basically, to paraphrase, he says that was a mistake.
Yeah, if anything, to prevent them from doing it again in the midterms. Congressman, you served overseas when you were deployed in the Air Force. What do you make of these reports that the president asked advisors about invading Venezuela last year? He did say it publicly, but that he brought it up privately to cabinet officials.
I don't have a problem with it at all. I mean, if you look at what we've done in the past, now I'm not advocating invading Venezuela, let's put that up front, but Bill Clinton almost did military action in Haiti. We deposed a dictator in Panama recently. We've invaded Grenada. having interest in our hemisphere is something that I think we need to do more of, to pay attention to what's going on. And I think for a president to simply ask and engage in a conversation what's good and what's bad about the idea of deposing a dictator in Venezuela is not something I think the president actually should explore that. It doesn't mean he's going to do it, but I think you have to look at millions of people starving and a huge refugee crisis for our friends in Colombia, et cetera, and a government that's highly unpopular. What can the United States do to fix that situation for people in our own hemisphere?
It's really the only time I can think of that I've heard him talk about human rights, the president, honestly. I mean, talking about starving people in Venezuela in terms of, invading that country. I want to ask you quickly, you're in Ottawa, Illinois for us right now. I want to ask you about these tariffs that go into effect tonight. We've already seen pork producers, soybean farmers and growers very concerned. Illinois, you are ground zero for trade disputes with China, with Mexico, with Canada. What are you telling your constituents? What are they telling you?
Well, we're all worried. I was in Gibson City last night celebrating the 4th. It's a very rural district I represent. Ag plays a very important role. These are the folks that voted for President Trump, and they're willing to give him a little leverage to fight for this, but they're also slightly nervous. I think where we see concern is not necessarily taking on China. There have been massively abusive trade practices, but it's also saying we'll take on Canada, Mexico, and the EU. That said, I hope the president's successful. He has a lot of leverage to do this. I hope he can win because we have to fight back, but there's no doubt a lot of my agricultural, my farmers are very nervous, and I'm nervous about it too.
How much leeway do you think they're going to give him? Because, I mean, honestly, land prices are going down, soybean prices are down. The near-term impact is already there.
Yeah, the impact's there. I mean, a lot of this started before even tariff talk. The ag economy started slipping about 5 years ago. We were sure to pass the farm bill to get that done. But they're going to give them some leverage, but at the same time, they're nervous. There's a way to be like, we hope the president's successful in this, but also we're kind of cautious about it at the same time. That's what people are feeling, I think, all around.
All right, we'll be following it. 12:01, those go into effect. Congressman Kinzinger, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Ottawa's a beautiful town, by the way.